What if I told you that the most influential book in human history, a collection that's shaped civilizations, inspired countless works of art, and continues to guide billions of people today, could be summarized in just 15 minutes? Now, before you grab your pitchforks, I'm not saying we can capture every nuance, every beautiful verse, or every profound teaching in a quarter hour. That would be like trying to explain the ocean by showing you a single drop of water. But here's what we can do. We can trace the incredible narrative arc that runs from the very first verse to the very last. A story that spans thousands of years, dozens of authors, and covers everything from the creation of the universe to the ultimate destiny of humanity. So buckle up, because we're about to take the most ambitious literary journey in human history. This is the Bible in 15 minutes. Introduction and context. Before we dive in, let's set some ground rules. The Bible isn't just one book. It's actually a library of 66 books written over roughly 1,500 years by more than 40 different authors. Think of it as the ultimate anthology series, except instead of different writers creating separate stories, these authors were all contributing to one massive interconnected narrative. We've got two main sections: the Old Testament with 39 books and the New Testament with 27. The Old Testament was primarily written in Hebrew and Aramaic, while the New Testament was written in Greek. And yes, before you ask, we're going to hit the highlights of both. Now, I'm going to do my best to present this as historically and accurately as possible, drawing from archaeological evidence, historical context, and scholarly research. Ready? Let's start at the very beginning, which, as we all know, is a very good place to start. Part 1, the Old Testament. Beginnings. Genesis, the foundation. Our story opens with perhaps the most famous line in literature. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis doesn't waste time with small talk. It jumps straight into cosmic creation, the formation of humanity, and immediately introduces us to the central tension that will drive the entire biblical narrative. We meet Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and within a few chapters, they've already managed to break the one rule they were given. It's like being told don't touch the red button and immediately reaching for it. This introduces the concept of human free will and its consequences, themes that will echo throughout the entire Bible. Then things escalate quickly. We get Cain killing Abel, the first murder, humanity becoming so corrupt that God decides to start over with Noah and the flood, and then the Tower of Babel, where humans try to build their way to heaven. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. But then Genesis shifts focus to one family that will change everything. Abraham. Around 2000 BCE, God makes a covenant with this nomadic patriarch, promising to make his descendants into a great nation and to bless all nations through them. This is huge. It's the beginning of what scholars call salvation history. The Patriarchs in Egypt. Abraham's family story continues through Isaac, Jacob, later renamed Israel, and Jacob's 12 sons, who become the 12 tribes of Israel. The most famous of these sons is Joseph, who gets sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, but eventually becomes second in command in Egypt. Here's where it gets interesting historically. Joseph's story likely takes place during Egypt's Middle Kingdom period, and archaeological evidence suggests there were indeed Semitic peoples in positions of power in Egypt during this time. Joseph's family moves to Egypt during a famine, and for a while life is good. But then, plot twist, a new pharaoh comes to power who did not know Joseph, and the Israelites become slaves. For about 400 years, they're building pyramids and cities for their Egyptian masters. This sets up one of the most dramatic rescue stories in human history. The Exodus in Moses. Enter Moses, around 1300 BCE. Raised in Pharaoh's household but ethnically Hebrew, Moses becomes the reluctant leader who will free his people from slavery. And when I say reluctant, I mean he literally argues with God at a burning bush about why he's not the right guy for the job. The Exodus story is epic in every sense. 10 plagues that devastate Egypt, the dramatic escape through the Red Sea, and then 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. During this time, Moses receives the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, establishing the moral and legal foundation that will influence Western civilization for millennia. The wilderness period isn't just about wandering, it's about nation building. The Israelites received detailed laws covering everything from worship to social justice, from dietary restrictions to property rights. The book of Leviticus might seem tedious to modern readers, but it was essentially the constitution of ancient Israel. Part 2, the Promised Land and Kings, Conquest and Judges. After Moses dies, Joshua leads the Israelites into the Promised Land around 1250 BCE. The conquest of Canaan is swift but incomplete. The Israelites settle among the existing Canaanite peoples, rather than completely displacing them. What follows is the period of the Judges, a roughly 300-year span where Israel has no central government, just local leaders who arise during times of crisis. It's like the Wild West, but with more divine intervention. The most famous judge is probably Samson, whose story reads like an ancient superhero comic. This period ends with Samuel, the last judge, who reluctantly anoints Israel's first king because the people demand to be like other nations. Samuel basically says, "You sure about this? Kings are expensive and tend to abuse power." Spoiler alert, he was right. The United Kingdom. Israel's first king, Saul, starts well but ends tragically. He's replaced by David, around 1000 BCE, a shepherd boy who killed a giant, wrote Psalms, and became Israel's greatest king. David captures Jerusalem, makes it his capital, and establishes a dynasty that will last 400 years. David's son Solomon builds the first temple in Jerusalem and becomes famous for his wisdom. The kingdom reaches its peak under Solomon, with trade routes extending from Egypt to Mesopotamia. But Solomon also heavily taxes the people and uses forced labor, setting up the kingdom's eventual downfall. The divided kingdom in exile. After Solomon dies around 930 BCE, the kingdom splits in two. Israel in the north with 10 tribes, and Judah in the south with 2 tribes. This is where things get complicated, because now we're tracking 2 separate kingdoms with different kings, different policies, and often different religious practices. The northern kingdom of Israel lasts about 200 years before being conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BCE. The 10 northern tribes are scattered and essentially disappear from history. They become the lost tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah lasts longer, but eventually falls to the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is demolished, and the educated elite are taken into exile in Babylon. This is one of the most traumatic events in Jewish history. The prophets. Throughout this period, prophets arise to call both kingdoms back to their covenant with God. These aren't fortune tellers, they're social critics, religious reformers, and political commentators all rolled into one. Isaiah warns of coming judgment, but also speaks of hope and restoration. Jeremiah weeps over Jerusalem's destruction. Ezekiel has bizarre visions while in Babylonian exile. These prophets don't just predict the future, they interpret current events through the lens of Israel's relationship with God. Part 3, Return and Restoration, the return from exile. In 539 BCE, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon, and the Persian king Cyrus issues a decree allowing exiled peoples to return to their homelands. This is historically documented. We actually have Cyrus's cylinder, which archaeologists call the first charter of human rights. The Jewish exiles return to Jerusalem in waves over several decades. They rebuild the temple, though it's not as grand as Solomon's, reconstruct the city walls, and work to restore their religious and cultural identity. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah chronicle this restoration period. The final Old Testament period. The last books of the Old Testament bring us to around 400 BCE. At this point, the Jewish people are a small province in the Persian Empire, but they've maintained their distinct identity and religious practices. Then comes what scholars call the Silent Years, about 400 years when no biblical books are written. But these aren't really silent years historically. Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire, spreading Greek culture throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans eventually take over, setting the stage for the New Testament. Part 4, the New Testament, the Game Changer. Jesus of Nazareth. Around 4 BCE, yes, the calendar is off by a few years. Jesus is born in Bethlehem during the reign of Caesar Augustus. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell his story from 4 different perspectives, like having 4 different camera angles on the same events. Jesus grows up in Nazareth, begins his public ministry around age 30, and teaches for approximately 3 years. His message centers on the kingdom of God, a new way of living that emphasizes love, forgiveness, and justice. But Jesus isn't just a teacher. He's presented as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies about a coming Messiah. The Gospels record him performing miracles, challenging religious authorities, and claiming a unique relationship with God. The Crucifixion and Resurrection. The climax of the Gospel story is Jesus' crucifixion around 30 CE, ordered by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Crucifixion was a common Roman execution method, and we have historical evidence for Pilate's existence and role in Judea. But the Gospels don't end with the crucifixion. They claim Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later. This resurrection becomes the central claim of Christianity and the catalyst for everything that follows. The early church. The book of Acts chronicles the explosive growth of the early Christian movement. Starting with about 120 followers in Jerusalem, Christianity spreads throughout the Roman Empire within a few decades. The key figure in this expansion is Paul of Tarsus, a former persecutor of Christians who becomes Christianity's greatest missionary after a dramatic conversion experience. Paul's letters make up about 1/3 of the New Testament and provide our earliest written accounts of Christian theology. The letters and final revelation. The New Testament letters address practical issues facing early Christian communities: how to live as followers of Jesus in a pagan world, how to resolve conflicts, how to maintain unity across cultural and ethnic boundaries. These letters reveal that early Christianity was incredibly diverse, with communities scattered across the Mediterranean, dealing with different challenges and developing different emphases while maintaining core beliefs about Jesus. The New Testament concludes with Revelation, a highly symbolic book written during a period of Roman persecution. It's apocalyptic literature, a genre that uses vivid imagery to convey hope during times of crisis. Revelation envisions the ultimate triumph of good over evil, the restoration of creation, and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. It ends with the beautiful image of a new heaven and new earth, where God will wipe away every tear. Conclusion: the bigger picture. So there you have it, the Bible in 15 minutes. We've covered about 4,000 years of history, from the creation of the world to the vision of its ultimate restoration. But here's what makes this collection of books remarkable. Despite being written by dozens of authors across 15 centuries, it tells one coherent story. It's the story of God's relationship with humanity, of human failure and divine grace, of judgment and redemption. Whether you approach the Bible as sacred scripture, ancient literature, or historical document, its influence on human civilization is undeniable. It has shaped laws, inspired art, motivated social reform movements, and continues to guide billions of people today. The themes we've traced, creation and fall, covenant and law, exile and return, incarnation and redemption, have become the fundamental narrative patterns of Western culture. You can't understand art, literature, music, or politics in the Western world without understanding these biblical themes. And perhaps most remarkably, this ancient collection of books continues to speak to contemporary issues. Questions of justice, the meaning of suffering, the nature of hope, and humanity's ultimate destiny. Of course, 15 minutes can only scratch the surface. Each book we've mentioned deserves hours of study. Every character we've met has depths we haven't explored. But hopefully this overview gives you a sense of the grand narrative that has captivated readers for millennia. Thanks for joining me on this whirlwind tour through the most influential book collection in human history. If this sparked your curiosity, I'd encourage you to dive deeper into any part of the story that intrigued you. Trust me, there's always more to discover.